Hey! Hi! How you doing? This is the Gamertron, and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. Consider this video a follow-up to my most recent video, my top 10 video game villains, or I should say, my brand new remaster remake of my original top 10 video game villains. It was a joy to make that video, to remake my very first top 10 countdown, and share to the world my favorite villains from video games, both old and new. However, if you watched my original top 10 video game villains, and you watched my latest video, I'm sure there's quite a few of you wondering, and I was wondering this myself, and it brought me to make this video, not just for the sake of people who are curious about why some of my favorite video game villains have changed, but how I have changed and how I perceive, how I prefer, and how I look for video game villains. With my original top 10 favorite video game villains, a huge aspect was their design, was their look, and was how powerful the moments in the games with them were to me. It's why my top 3 favorite video game villains of all time with my original top 10 was Handsome Jack from Borderlands 2, Andrew Ryan from the original BioShock, and the Overlord from Overlord 2. And while I still adore Andrew Ryan, after all these years I've kind of come to the realization that, well, he's not really a villain. And really, the only reason I put him on my top 10 video game villains list was because, one, I loved the voice work, I loved his voice, I loved his character, I loved his dialogue. And the moments with Andrew Ryan are powerful and memorable ones. I just didn't stop to think, though, really, is he really a villain? Or is he a victim of circumstance? Is he an anti-hero? Andrew Ryan is many things. He's a fantastic video game character, and he's definitely a huge part of and a key factor of the plot and the video game as a whole, BioShock. But over the years, I've come to realize that Andrew Ryan's not really a villain, which is why he was once my second favorite video game villain of all time, no longer. There were other villains missing or replaced from my original top 10 to my new top 10 villains, including Jack of Blades, the Prophet of Truth, Jacob Arthur Danik, from Fable, Halo 2, and Dead Space 3, respectively. And just looking back on those villains, I see that the reason I liked those villains so much was not really because of their characters, but because of their aesthetics, in terms of their character design, their dialogue, the role they played in the story, but mostly their design. Design was a big part of it back then. And while I certainly like to believe I gave some good reasons why those were my favorite video game villains, specifically from plot and character and dialogue standpoints, but when I look back to that video, when I go through my notes of when I originally wrote the script for that video, when I watch that video, because I do watch my videos over and over again looking for flaws, ways I could improve, and just admiring the stuff that I was like, I did that really well. That was actually a really good part of my video. That was actually really well edited. I'm glad how that turned out. Any YouTube content creator can get an idea of where I'm coming from here. But when I look back at my original top 10 video game villains and those villains, Jack of Blades, Prophet of Truth, Jacob Arthur Danik, I realized that they're good video game villains, but there are just technically, objectively better video game villains out there that fulfill their role and the purpose of villain, of antagonist, better. The same goes with my original number 1 favorite video game villain, the Overlord. I love the Overlord's design so much, but I think that kind of overshadowed a lot of my reasoning. While I do think I came up with some good reasoning concerning that he's the playable character, you are him, the whole Overlord game franchise is about you playing as a villain, but I still like the Overlord. I love the Overlord. I love the Overlord games. On a side note and a bit of a tangent, the Overlord games could really do with a remaster. Updated graphics, smoother controls, that sort of thing. I may make a separate video on that topic altogether. But again, while I love the Overlord, and the Overlord is technically a good video game villain, he has no character. He has 0 character. Your advisor, Gnarl, the eldest and main minion, he has more of a character than your playable character, than the antagonist and protagonist of the game, the Overlord. And that's become a real big deciding factor for me in terms of my favorite video game villains, and when making my new top 10 favorite video game villains list, was character. Who these villains were as individuals, as people. Even though some of them are robots and demons and monsters and stuff like that, they're still technically people. They are individuals with personalities, with motivations and desires. When I was younger, I cared more about design and aesthetics. Now I care more about character. And another big contributing factor, even maybe more so than character, is their effect on the plot, and how the villains really affect the plot of the game, and how they affect the world of the game. It's why villains like Handsome Jack and Corvus and Victor Valent remained some of my top 10 favorite video game villains, and I kind of moved their places around, depending of course on design, but also character, and now more so how they affected the plot, which is again why they remained, why I like them so much, and why I decided to move them around a little. Like, I still like Victor Valent, and in my previous top 10, he was number 5 on my list, but he got downgraded to number 10 on my list. Like, I still like Victor Valent, I still love The Darkness 2, and I think Victor plays a good part in the plot. He's an excellent foil for the protagonist, Jackie Estacado. And while my top 10s are completely subjective, there is a hint of objectivity. I like to throw some objectivity in there, and when I look at other video game villains, and I look at Victor, while I really like Victor, there are just some villains that I liked more and did better jobs as villains, objectively, and also from my subjective opinion. It's also why Corvus was moved up way higher on my list, how he became my second favorite video game villain, because he has a huge role in the plot, he is a huge affecting aspect in the game's story, characters, and even the gameplay. And I look at Corvus from Divinity Dragon Commander, and he's just such a unique villain in that regard, and how much of a role he plays in the plot, how he affects the characters and the game. He is a unique and menacing antagonist. And then there were many of the newcomers to my top 10 favorite video game villains, like General Serrano from Bulletstorm, Jonathan Irons from Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, Apollyon from For Honor, and my new number 1 favorite villain, which I won't spoil in this video. Go watch my top 10 favorite video game villains of all time, and play the video game Spec Ops: The Line, because my number 1 favorite video game villain spoils the video game Spec Ops: The Line. You need to play Spec Ops: The Line. I do not want to spoil that game for you if you have not played it. It is really that good of a game. I usually don't give a shit about spoilers. Spec Ops: The Line is the one rare exception where I will say to everyone, go play that friggin' game. I don't like to tell people where to spend their money, what games they should play. For the most part, I don't like that, I disagree with that, and I apologize if I've done that in the past, but for the most part, I like to say, buy what you want, play what you want, it's your money, etc, etc. Spec Ops: The Line is the one rare exception because it's such a good fucking game. It's a true work of art. It's a powerful, emotional experience and journey that you need to play for yourself. And if you play for that game, I'd like to think you'd come to an understanding why I picked the antagonist of Spec Ops: The Line as my favorite new video game villain. I like to think when it came to my number 1 favorite video game villain in my new top 10, that was very open and very detailed as to why my favorite video game villain of all time was my favorite video game villain of all time. But enough about that. About the other newcomers like Apollyon, Serrano, and Irons. With those villains, again, it was about the characters, it was about their effect on the plot, their influence and how they affected the game and those within it. Because I come to realize that a good villain in any form of fiction or media, whether it be video games, movies, television, whatever, a good villain creates effective and palpable change. And if you look at all of my favorite video game villains, they all affect and change the characters and the world of their said video games. With Bulletstorm, for instance, General Serrano, he is the motivator and the instigator for the actions of the protagonist, Grayson Hunt. Grayson Hunt would not do what he does in Bulletstorm if it was not for the actions of Serrano. And then we come to Jonathan Irons from Advanced Warfare. I cannot state this enough, it's friggin' Kevin Spacey. And he just delivers such a fantastic performance, as Kevin Spacey does. But with the character of Jonathan Irons, the character in the world of Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, he literally changes the world. It is solely through his actions that the world of Call of Duty Advanced Warfare is affected the way that it is. The whole reason the world is at war in Advanced Warfare is because of its villain, is because of Irons. He is also a motivator and instigator for change when it comes to the main protagonist, Mitchell, and the relationship he has with the protagonist. And then we come to Apollyon from For Honor, and Apollyon is basically the story mode of For Honor. I don't even know why For Honor bothered calling their story mode. They should have just called it Apollyon mode. Because it's all about her. While there are certainly other side characters, supporting characters, and your main playable protagonist characters, Apollyon, the villain, steals the show. She is the story of For Honor. Everything, and I mean everything that happens in For Honor is because of Apollyon. On top of that, when we look at these newcomers to my top 10 favorite video game villains, when we look at their characters, they are unique characters with their own unique traits and personalities, like my previous favorite video game villains, some of which of course returned, like Victor, Dr. Nefarious, Harbinger, Handsome Jack. They all have unique character traits. Serrano is a complete potty mouth. Jonathan Irons has a very commanding persona about him. Apollyon has this unique perspective and mindset on war and life. And then we have with my returning villains just pure insanity and megalomania, with Victor, Nefarious, and Jack. And then we come to Harbinger and the Reapers. Now I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna be totally honest here, I was really on the fence if Harbinger and the Reapers were some of my favorite video game villains of all time, and whether I would be replacing them or having them return in my top 10, because while I love Mass Effect 2 and 3, I love the Mass Effect series, I love the Mass Effect franchise, the Mass Effect trilogy, I love Mass Effect, they're some of my favorite video games of all time. So I'm thinking Mass Effect are some of my favorite video games of all time. Surely the villains in the Mass Effect trilogy would be some of my favorite villains, and that was really hard because I look at the Reapers and there's not a lot of character to the Reapers outside of Harbinger and Sovereign, these few specific Reapers. And then I look at screen time. Screen time is also another important thing I looked at when looking at my favorite video game villains. How much time did they have actually being seen and heard from in the game? And Harbinger actually doesn't have that many speaking roles or scenes specific to him. Same with Sovereign. He's got really one specific speaking scene and one action scene. Harbinger gets a few more scenes. But again, there's not that much screen time, not that much voice work, not that much dialogue with the Reapers. But then I realized that the Harbinger and the Reapers had to be a special exception because I love them as video game villains, and I kind of came to the realization why I really love them for video game villains. And not just specifically for their design, but I looked back at the important points I was looking for, their effect on the story, on the world, on the characters, on the plot. And the Reapers are an enormous, if they are not the plot of the Mass Effect original trilogy. The Mass Effect trilogy, for the most part, is about stop the Reapers, save the galaxy from the Reapers. And the Reapers truly are an incredibly imposing and dangerous threat. And that's what makes the Reapers such great villains. Not really their character, but their imposing and threatening nature they place on the characters and on the world and on the story of Mass Effect. It's been a very unique self-journey I've been having with remaking my top 10 favorite video game villains and replaying some of my favorite video games to reintroduce myself with some of my favorite video game villains. And it's really made me appreciate the dialogue, the work, the scripting, the editing, just everything that is needed to bring these characters to life. And I have a newfound appreciation. I already had a great, deep appreciation for video game villains already, but now it goes even deeper with how much I realize video game villains matter and how much they affect us, how much they affect the games we play. So like I said at the end of my last video, long live video game villains. And this has been a video. Please let me know your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on this video, on my previous video, on video game villains as a whole. I'd love to read your thoughts, feelings, and opinions in the comment section down below. If you like this video in any way, shape, or form, please be sure to hit the like button. Hitting the like button helps you, helps me, helps everybody involved with the video. If you hit the like button, if you want to help out and support me on social media, then please share this video on Facebook and Twitter. And if you want to help out and support me directly, well, there's always Patreon. Anyways, guys, that's been a video, and I'll see you all later.